Here's to Claire, the only woman who married into money and still shops in the lost and found. I had quietly purchased this land weeks ago. By Monday, they would understand why I stayed silent.
My mother-in-law raised her glass in front of 30 people and said, "Here's to Claire, the only woman I know who married into money and still dresses like she shops in the lost and found." Everyone laughed. My husband laughed too. I stood beside the picnic table with a paper plate in my hands, smiled once, and said nothing. What none of them knew was that the cookout was being held on land I had quietly purchased 3 weeks earlier. And by Monday morning, every person laughing at me would understand exactly why I had stayed silent. Hello. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 36 years old when I finally learned that silence can be more powerful than any argument, especially when the people humiliating you have no idea what you know. I had been married to my husband, Ryan, for 9 years. When we first met, he was funny, patient, and ambitious. He worked as a regional sales manager for a building supply company in Ohio, and I worked from home as a financial analyst. Ryan's mother, Denise, never liked me. She did not hate me in a loud or obvious way. She was too careful for that. Denise preferred little cuts that could be dismissed as jokes. At Christmas, she would hand me a sweater 2 sizes too large and say, "I guessed, you hide your shape so well." At birthdays, she would praise Ryan for supporting us, even though I earned more than he did. When I brought homemade food to family dinners, she would taste it, smile, and ask whether I had followed the recipe correctly. If I objected, she tilted her head and said, "Claire, you are so sensitive." Ryan always told me to ignore her. "She's from another generation," he would say. Or, "That's just mom's humor." Or the sentence I hated most, "Be the bigger person." For years, I tried. I stayed polite. I helped clean after holidays. I remembered birthdays. I drove Denise to medical appointments when Ryan was busy. I even helped refinance her house after she fell behind on payments. She never thanked me. Instead, she told people Ryan had fixed everything. The backyard cookout happened in early June. Denise hosted one every summer at her old farmhouse outside Columbus. The property had belonged to her second husband, Walter, who died 4 years earlier. The farmhouse sat on 6 acres beside a county road. Behind the house were a detached garage, a weathered barn, and a large field that Denise rented to a local farmer. The place looked peaceful from the outside, but the mortgage was not peaceful. Walter had taken loans against the property before he died. Denise had hidden the problem until the bank began calling. She owed back taxes, missed mortgage payments, and more than $20,000 to contractors who had repaired the roof. Ryan knew she was struggling, but he did not know how badly. I knew because Denise had called me one afternoon and begged for help. She did not call Ryan. She called me because I understood numbers. Her voice shook as she explained that the bank planned to begin foreclosure proceedings. She said losing the property would destroy her. It was the last connection she had to Walter, and she wanted Ryan to inherit it one day. Then she made me promise not to tell anyone. "I don't want the family thinking I manage my own affairs," she said. I spent 2 weeks reviewing her documents. The situation was worse than she admitted. Even if we caught up the mortgage, the tax debt and contractor liens would remain. The only practical solution was a private sale before foreclosure. I offered to buy the property through an LLC I had created years earlier for small real estate investments. The price would cover the mortgage, taxes, and liens. Denise could remain in the farmhouse under a 3-year lease at a low monthly rate. She would avoid foreclosure, protect her credit, and have time to decide where she wanted to live next. Denise agreed immediately. She cried while signing the contract. "You are saving me?" she whispered. I believed that moment might change our relationship. I was wrong. 3 weeks later, she invited the entire family to her cookout and acted as if nothing had happened. Ryan's sister, Melissa, arrived with her husband and 2 teenage sons. Cousins, neighbors, church friends, and several of Ryan's coworkers filled the yard. Music played near the patio. Smoke rose from the grill. Coolers were packed with beer and soda. I arrived wearing a simple blue dress and flat sandals, because I had spent the morning helping a client finish a quarterly report. Denise looked me up and down. "You came straight from cleaning the house?" she asked. "No," I said. "I came from work." She laughed. "Of course. Your little computer job." My job was not little. I managed financial risk for companies with millions of dollars in annual revenue. But Denise had never cared enough to understand what I did. Ryan heard her comment and said nothing. That was the first warning. The second came when Melissa asked whether Ryan and I planned to renovate our kitchen. Before I could answer, Denise said, "They probably can't afford it. Ryan carries most of the load." Melissa laughed. Ryan looked at his drink. I waited for him to correct her. He did not. Then Denise began telling everyone about the new outdoor kitchen she wanted to build near the barn. Stainless steel counters, a stone fireplace, a covered seating area. She spoke as if she owned the property free and clear. I watched her describe plans for land that legally belonged to me. That should have been the moment I exposed her. But something in her confidence made me curious. Why would a woman who had nearly lost everything 3 weeks earlier suddenly promise expensive renovations? Then Ryan's coworker, Greg, walked toward the barn with a rolled set of papers under his arm. Denise followed him. So did Ryan. They did not see me watching. I placed my plate down and waited 30 seconds before walking behind the garage. The barn door was partly open. Inside, Greg spread blueprints across an old workbench. Ryan stood beside him. Denise pointed toward the back field. If we clear the trees here, she said, the road can come through from the east side. Greg nodded. The developer will want access before closing. My heart began to pound. Developer, closing. Ryan lowered his voice, but I heard him clearly. Claire doesn't know yet. Keep it that way until the offer is final. I stepped back before they saw me. For several seconds, I could not move. Denise had sold the property to me because she was desperate. Now she and my husband appeared to be negotiating with a developer behind my back. They could not legally sell land they no longer owned. Unless Ryan believed he could make me sign something, or unless he planned to use my name without permission. I returned to the cookout and said nothing. 10 minutes later, Denise gave her toast and mocked my clothes in front of everyone. The laughter spread across the yard. Ryan laughed with them. I looked at him and saw no embarrassment in his face. Only nervousness. That was when I understood something important. The joke was not random. They were trying to remind everyone that I was foolish, dependent, and insignificant. They were building a story about me before the real fight began. So I smiled. I placed my untouched plate in the trash. Then I walked to my car without saying goodbye. Ryan did not follow me. Ryan came home after midnight. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open and a cup of cold tea beside me. He stopped when he saw me. You left without telling anyone, he said. You seemed busy. His expression tightened. You know how she is. I do. He waited for an argument. I gave him none. That unsettled him more than anger would have. He opened the refrigerator, stared inside, and asked, Are you going to punish me with silence now? No. What is this? I'm tired. He closed the refrigerator harder than necessary. You embarrass me when you act like this around my family. I almost laughed. He had watched his mother humiliate me in front of 30 people. Yet somehow my quiet departure embarrassed him. But I still said nothing. The next morning, Ryan left early for a client meeting. I checked the location sharing on our family phone plan. We had enabled it years earlier for emergencies and never turned it off. He was not at a client's office. He was at a downtown law firm. I took screenshots. Then I called my attorney, Nina Patel. Nina had handled the purchase of Denise's property. She was calm, precise, and difficult to surprise. When I told her what I had overheard, she asked one question. Does Ryan have access to the LLC documents? He has seen some of them. Does he have signing authority? No. Could he access your digital signature? That question chilled me. My encrypted signature file was stored on my home office computer. Ryan knew the password to the computer because we had shared it during tax season. I drove home immediately. The signature file was still there, but the access log showed it had been opened 6 days earlier at 11:43 p.m. I had been asleep at that time. I checked the printer history. 3 documents had been printed that night: a property authorization form, a marital consent agreement, and a preliminary letter of intent from Westbridge Development Group. The printer no longer stored the full files, but it showed the document names. I photographed everything. Nina told me not to confront Ryan. If someone is attempting fraud, she said, we need to know how far it goes before they destroy evidence. We spent the day protecting the LLC. Nina filed new restrictions with the title company and county recorder. Any transfer lien or contract involving the property would require in-person verification from me and a special authorization code. I changed every password. Then we contacted Westbridge Development Group. Their acquisitions manager, Thomas Reed, agreed to meet Nina and me the next morning. Thomas entered the conference room carrying a thick folder. He looked confused when Nina introduced me as the property owner. I thought the owner was Denise Bennett, he said. She was, Nina replied. She sold the property last month. Thomas slowly opened the folder. Inside was a purchase proposal for $1.8 million. The developer wanted the 6 acres because a new commercial road was planned nearby. The barn and field were positioned perfectly for a small retail center and medical offices. Denise had sold the property to me for $412,000, the exact amount needed to clear her debts and costs. She had not known about the development when she signed. But someone learned afterward. That someone was Ryan. Thomas showed us an email chain. Ryan had contacted Westbridge using his work email. He claimed his mother still owned the property, and that I was only handling paperwork. He said I would sign whatever was necessary once the final offer arrived. Then Thomas showed us something worse. A scanned authorization form bearing my name and digital signature. The form gave Ryan permission to negotiate on behalf of my LLC. I had never signed it. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice steady. Did you verify this? I asked. Thomas looked embarrassed. We were preparing to. Nothing is final. Who provided it? Your husband. Nina asked for copies of everything. As we left, Thomas said, "For what it's worth, Mrs. Bennett, your husband told us the marriage was ending, and that the property would soon be part of a divorce settlement." I stopped walking. The hallway seemed to tilt. Did he say who wanted the divorce? He said you did. I had never discussed divorce. Not once. In the parking garage, I sat inside Nina's car and stared at the concrete wall. The betrayal was larger than a land deal. Ryan had forged my authorization, lied about our marriage, and tried to position himself between me and a $1.8 million sale. Then my phone rang. It was Melissa. I almost ignored it, but Nina said, "Answer." Put it on speaker. Melissa's voice sounded falsely cheerful. "Claire, Mom feels awful about yesterday. She wants to have dinner and clear the air." "I'm busy." "It's important." "Ryan says you've been stressed about money." I looked at Nina. "What money?" I asked. There was a pause. "You know the house, your job, everything. My job is fine." "Of course. I only meant Ryan worries about you." "Does he?" Another pause. Then Melissa said, "Families should be able to trust each other." I nearly admired the cruelty of that sentence. "I agree," I said. After the call ended, Nina leaned back in her seat. "They are trying to get you into a room. To pressure me into signing. Possibly. Or to record you saying something they can use later." I looked down at the forged document in my hands. For years, I had believed Denise's insults were the main problem. Now I realized they were camouflage. While I defended myself against jokes, Ryan had been quietly studying my accounts, my passwords, and my assets. The cookout was not just humiliation. It was preparation. They wanted witnesses who would remember me as unstable, oversensitive, and financially dependent. They wanted a story ready for court. That evening, I agreed to dinner. But I did not go alone. Dinner was scheduled for Sunday at Denise's house. The same house she no longer owned. Before I left, Nina arranged for a licensed investigator named Marcus Hill to sit in a car across the road. Ohio law allowed me to record a conversation I was part of, so my phone and watch were both recording. Nina waited at her office with copies of the deed, the forged authorization, and the Westbridge emails. I wore the same blue dress Denise had mocked at the cookout. When I entered the dining room, Ryan, Denise, and Melissa were already seated. No one had prepared dinner. There were only glasses of water and a folder on the table. Ryan stood. "Thanks for coming." I sat across from him. Denise gave me a sad smile. "We're worried about you." "Why? You've been distant?" she said. Secretive, and Melissa nodded. "And emotional." I folded my hands in my lap. Ryan opened the folder. Inside was a contract. "I found an opportunity that could solve everything," he said. "What needs solving?" "Our future." He pushed the contract toward me. The document was a marital property agreement. It stated that any proceeds from the sale of Denise's former property would become joint marital assets under Ryan's control for investment purposes. It also gave him power to complete the sale through my LLC. "You want me to sign this?" I asked. "It protects both of us," he said. Denise leaned forward. "That land belongs to this family, Claire." "No. You sold it." Her face changed for half a second. Then she recovered. "I sold it because you pressured me?" I looked at Ryan. He did not appear surprised by her accusation. The plan became clear. If I refused to sign, Denise would claim I had taken advantage of her financial distress. Ryan would support her. Melissa would confirm that I was controlling and unstable. They would challenge the sale, threaten my reputation, and force me into a settlement. If I signed, Ryan would control the $1.8 million. Either way, they expected to win. I picked up the contract and slowly read the first page. Ryan relaxed. "See," he said. "No one is trying to hurt you." Denise added, "We only want what is fair." I looked up. "What is fair?" "The profit should stay with my children," she said. "I am your son's wife." "You are temporary," Denise replied. The room went silent. Melissa looked down. Ryan stared at his mother, but he did not correct her. I felt something inside me finally become still. For 9 years, I had tried to earn a place in this family. In one sentence, Denise admitted they had never considered me family at all. I turned to Ryan. "Is that what you believe?" He rubbed his forehead. "Don't make this dramatic. Is our marriage temporary? This is about business." "No, it's about whether you forged my signature." All three faces changed. Ryan recovered first. "I don't know what you're talking about." I placed a copy of the authorization form on the table. Melissa whispered, "Oh my God. Denise said nothing. Ryan looked at the signature, then at me. You signed that? No. You must have forgotten. I did not. His voice became sharper. You've been under pressure. You forget things. There it was, the story they had prepared. I was emotional, confused, forgetful. I placed the Westbridge email chain beside the forged form. Did I also forget that you told a developer we were divorcing? Denise turned toward him. You told them that. Ryan ignored her. He stood and pointed at me. You went through my email. No. The developer gave emails to my attorney. The word attorney changed the air. Melissa pushed back from the table. Ryan's anger disappeared and was replaced by calculation. Claire, let's slow down. I have been slow for 9 years. Denise began crying. Real tears this time. You tricked me into selling, she said. You knew the land was valuable. I did not know. Neither did you? You should give it back. You used the money I paid you to stop foreclosure. That does not matter. It matters legally? Orion lowered his voice. You think you're going to keep all that money while my mother loses her home. Your mother has a 3-year lease. I gave her that protection. She deserves more. She deserves the agreement she signed. He leaned over the table. And what do I deserve? I looked at him for a long moment. The consequences of your choices. But then someone knocked on the front door. Denise frowned. Who is that? I invited 2 people, I said. Nina entered first. Behind her was Deputy Collins from the county sheriff's office. Ryan went pale. The deputy explained that he was there to collect information related to a suspected forged property authorization and attempted financial fraud. He was not arresting anyone that evening, but he had a preservation notice requiring Ryan not to delete relevant electronic records. Nina handed him copies of the documents. Ryan began talking quickly. He said the signature was a misunderstanding. He said I had given verbal permission. He said Westbridge had misinterpreted his statements. Then Denise made the mistake that changed everything. She pointed at me and shouted. She was supposed to sign after we scared her enough. The room froze. Melissa covered her mouth. Ryan closed his eyes. The deputy looked at Denise. Scared her how? Denise realized what she had said. I meant pressured. Not scared. Who is Wu? He asked. No one answered. My watch recorded every word. I stood and picked up my purse. Ryan moved toward me. Claire, please. We can fix this. I stepped away. No, I said. You can answer for it. I walked out of the farmhouse while the deputy continued asking questions. For the first time in years, I did not feel guilty for leaving. The next 2 months were ugly. Ryan hired a lawyer and claimed he believed Elysian to negotiate the sale. Denise filed a civil complaint accusing me of taking advantage of her. Melissa initially supported them, then changed her story after learning that investigators had recovered text messages from a family group chat. The messages revealed everything. Ryan had learned about the development project through Greg, his co-worker. Greg's brother worked for a transportation consulting firm and had seen early road plans. Ryan told Denise the property could become valuable. But instead of warning me, they created a plan. First, Ryan would approach Westbridge before public news increased the price. Second, he would use my digital signature to appear authorized. Third, they would pressure me to sign a marital agreement giving Ryan control of the proceeds. If I refused, Denise would accuse me of coercing her into the original sale. The cookout had been part of the plan. In the group chat, Denise wrote, "Make sure everyone sees how strange she acts. She always goes quiet when she is upset." Melissa replied, "I can mention that Ryan pays for everything." Ryan wrote, "Do not overdo it. We only need witnesses who think she is unstable." Rating those messages hurt more than the forged signature. Financial betrayal was terrible, but watching my husband design my humiliation, like a business strategy, destroyed something deeper. I filed for divorce. Ryan begged me to reconsider. He sent flowers to my office. He left long voice messages. He said his mother had manipulated him. He said he had only wanted to secure our future. But every apology contained the same hidden demand to protect him from consequences. He was sorry that I had discovered the plan. He was not sorry he had made it. The criminal investigation continued. Greg cooperated and turned over messages showing that Ryan had promised him a percentage of the deal. Because no transfer was completed, the charges focused on forgery, attempted fraud, and unauthorized use of digital credentials. Ryan accepted a plea agreement. He received probation, community service, financial penalties, and a permanent criminal record that cost him his job. Denise withdrew her civil complaint after Nina filed a counterclaim for defamation, attempted interference with contract, and legal expenses. As part of the settlement, Denise's 3-year lease was terminated early. I gave her 90 days to move. Some relatives called me cruel. They said she was an older widow with nowhere to go. Those same relatives had laughed at the cookout. Not one had offered to pay her mortgage when foreclosure threatened. Not one had offered her a room after the lease ended. They wanted me to carry the cost of their compassion. I refused. Denise moved into Melissa's basement. Their relationship quickly collapsed. Denise criticized Melissa's parenting, complained about the food, and demanded control of the household. 6 months later, Melissa helped her move into a small apartment across town. By then, the county of the road expansion. Westbridge returned with a new offer. This time, the price was $2.1 million. I did not accept immediately. I hired my own appraiser, environmental consultant, and land use attorney. We negotiated for 4 months. The final agreement paid me $2.35 million and allowed me to keep a half-acre section containing the old barn. I could have demolished it. Instead, I renovated it into a financial education center for women rebuilding their lives after divorce, debt, or financial abuse. I named it the Stillwater Center. The name came from something my grandmother used to say. Still water is not empty, it is deep. We offered free workshops on credit, budgeting, property ownership, digital security, and legal documents. I funded the first 3 years with part of the sale proceeds. The rest went into long-term investments and a new home that belonged only to me. The divorce was finalized 11 months after the cookout. Ryan received a fair division of our actual marital assets, but he had no claim to the LLC property because I had purchased it with separate funds and maintained clear records. His attempt to control the land had ultimately proven that he knew it was mine. On the day the divorce became final, he asked to speak with me outside the courthouse. He looked older, tired, smaller somehow. "I lost everything," he said. I shook my head. "No, you lost access to things that were never yours." He looked away. "Do you ever miss me?" I thought about our early years. Sunday drives, cheap pizza on the living room floor, the way he once held my hand during my father's funeral. "Yes," I said honestly. "I miss who I believed you were." He began to cry. For a moment, I felt the old instinct to comfort him. Then I remembered the group chat. Make sure everyone sees how strange she acts. I walked away. A year after the cookout, the Stillwater Center held its opening celebration. More than 100 people came. There were folding tables, barbecue, music, and children running across the grass. The setting reminded me of Denise's party, but the feeling was completely different. No one was there to measure another person's clothes, income, marriage, or worth. Near sunset, Nina handed me a glass of lemonade and said, "You know what still amazes me?" "What?" "That you did not expose them at the cookout." I wanted to. "Why didn't you?" I looked across the field toward the renovated barn. "Because people reveal more when they believe you are too weak to stop them." Later that evening, I stood before the guests to thank them. I told them the center had been created for anyone who had ever been made to feel foolish, for asking questions about money, property, or power. I did not mention Ryan or Denise by name. I did not need to. When I finished speaking, a woman in the front row raised her hand. She was in her 50s, recently divorced, and had attended our first credit workshop. She said, "I spent 27 years letting people call me stupid because I did not understand our finances. Last month, I opened my own bank account." Everyone applauded. She wiped her eyes and smiled. That moment meant more to me than winning the court case, selling the land, or watching the people who mocked me face consequences. Revenge had protected me, but justice became meaningful only when it helped someone else stand up. I sometimes think about the cookout. I remember the heat, the smoke from the grill, Denise's raised glass, and the sound of everyone laughing. Back then, they thought my silence meant shame. They thought I had no answer. The truth was simpler. I was listening, I was learning, and I was giving them enough room to reveal exactly who they were. They mocked the quiet woman at the edge of the yard. They never realized she owned the ground beneath their feet.